Oh, yeah. Hello, this is Benjamin Boyce, and welcome to the Voice of Reason interview cast. Today's guest is John Sonmez, who is a speaker and author and tech. I don't know if guru is the right word, but he has some courses regarding tech and personal development. And recently, he got into a spate of trouble with a Twitter mob when he engaged on behalf of somebody else who was being mobbed on Twitter. And that led to a series of incidents where he ended up losing a lot of income because that's how the mob rolls nowadays. So we talk about that incident and about how the social justice, capital S, capital J, warrior, capital W, and ARRIOR, because they are very fervent nowadays, that mindset has infected the tech industry as well as other industries. And then we move from that to his personal experiences. Then we go into his Bulldog mindset philosophy. And then we double back and we approach the events that happened in his life recently and with regards to social justice more broadly in the light of a stoic philosophical disposition. I do think you guys are going to enjoy this. This is a little bit longer than normal, but we just get in deep and end up talking a little bit more than I expected about a man with a magic glove. So that said, here's John Sonmez.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about what specifically happened to me, but I think there's overall a generally bigger phenomenon that's going on in the tech industry, where really social justice warriors have really taken over the tech industry, and it's gotten to kind of a scary boiling point where people are afraid to say anything, and it's gotten pretty bad.
It's really interesting because these tactics are the same, no matter what community they enter into. Small businesses, communities, colleges, anything is really, any group of humans is really susceptible to what we're calling the social justice warrior, I guess, mindset or ideology. I wonder if it has the same effect of shutting down discourse, but also bringing the actual work of, is it education or coding or any business, to the same place of there's a very narrow group of people who control all discourse and therefore get to make all the actual decisions beyond just community policing.
Yeah, I mean, and what's especially troubling in tech is that what happens is a lot of these people, there's no negative implications for them. So, the people that are controlling the discourse, and what ends up happening is that for everyone else, there is a lot of downside, right? And there's really no upside. So what ends up happening is, and what's happening right now, is that certain voices with a certain message are being heard, and there's no draw, no basically, I'd say, drawback to them doing what they're doing. They benefit actually from it, and the mass of people that disagree with them, there's no positive. There's nothing that can be they can gain from doing that, but or from arguing back,
standing up to them or arguing back. Yeah,
exactly. So there's very few people speaking up, and they're rightly thinking, okay, well, it doesn't make sense to risk myself out there, which is basically just emboldening and strengthening this one position, because there's the huge negative ramifications as I experienced with my whole situation recently, and yeah, it's pretty frightening right now.
So what happened to you recently? You want to give the overview of that?
Yeah, so basically, I run a company called Simple Programmer. And in the tech industry as software development, I've been running that blog for about 10 years. And I built up a pretty good reputation in the software development industry, having a couple of best-selling books and doing a lot of training for a company called Pluralsight and selling courses on my site. And what ended up happening was I hadn't signed into my Twitter account for quite some time. I tend to ignore Twitter, and social justice warrior Haven is is typically on Twitter, so I just don't want to mess with that. But a friend of mine had messaged me on Facebook, and he said, "Hey, there's a mutual friend of ours, Amy, who is being attacked by this mob of social justice warriors, the same mob that had attacked and basically tried to cancel other people and had attacked her in the past, and and it's pretty bad." So I took a look on Twitter to see what was going on, to see, and this was a person that had been on one of my podcasts. She's a really good developer, just a really good person, and I looked and see what was happening, and basically she said to the effect of, I'm glad that I didn't become a developer in 2019, because a lot of the people that are promoting diversity and inclusion seem to be really angry and using a lot of profanity, and that would scare me away. Basically something to that effect. That's not the exact quote, but anyway, so what ended up happening was she started getting a huge amount of blowback from that pretty simple statement. And it was basically the whole mob of cancel culture, attacking her. Right? People were threatening her job, saying, "Oh, it would be a shame if something happened to your job," and threatening to call her employers, and just raking her over the coals for this really simple statement that she said.
And that statement wasn't aimed at any identity, any protected, vulnerable group. It was about a certain sort of behavior.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. I mean, and considering that she's actually pretty outspoken as far as inclusion and diversity. I mean, she's a woman in tech programmer, and she's helped a lot of women to get started as developers, but she didn't like the kind of culture that's being adopted. Like, again, when I saw your interviews on, or your videos on Evergreen, it was a similar type of thing where it's angry people shouting and refusing to hear any other viewpoints, and that's what she was against, right? So anyways, she got a lot of hate for that, and so I thought, well, I don't have much to lose. I'm independent. I've got my own company, right? I'm an author, right? I don't work for anyone. No one can fire me. So I decided to jump in there, and my plan was to basically defray the attacks and move them onto me, right? To be inflammatory, to start attacking all these people that were bullying and attacking her, thinking that I could turn the fire to myself, and then they would forget about her. And what are they really going to do to me? I mean, I don't care what someone says to me on Twitter, and they can't call my employer. Well, it worked, and I was wrong. So I didn't realize how powerful the whole cancel culture was. So I said a lot of I'll admit I said some nasty things to pretty much anyone that was attacking her, trying to get them to attack me. So I didn't say, I wasn't very civil myself. So I will fully admit being an asshole, but I was definitely attacking people that were attacking her. And one of the things that really got the mob wild with craze to destroy me was, so. And a bunch of the tweets are deleted that they had posted, but someone had told me to shut my mouth, and then this black woman happened to say something about, oh yeah, someone had told me that I should just be quiet and be happy where I am, and not make trouble or something like that. And I replied back and I said, yes, you should. You should shut your mouth, and we should all be happy where we are, and we should not attack people, just because they differ in opinion, right? And another woman had saw that, and she replied back to my tweet and said, how dare you have the gall to tell a woman to shut her mouth? And I thought that's kind of interesting. Why does it matter if she's a woman, right? Like, I don't care. I'm telling everyone to shut their mouth. I'm telling everyone, all kinds of stuff. So my reply back to her was, shut your mouth, which that was like the final explosion. That got retweeted just thousands of times. And people copy and paste it. They did a screenshot of black woman I'm telling her to shut her mouth. Another woman, I'm telling her to shut her mouth. So now I'm this sexist, misogynistic, racist. Now I'm racist as well because it just so happened this was a black woman, right? Even though, all the tweets I'm calling guys pussies. I'm telling other people to shut their mouth, right? But they point out that one thing, and what ended up happening was, I mean, I got spammed hundreds and probably thousands of messages, hate, so many emails, death threats, and then they started tweeting at my publishers. So Pluralsight, who had published my courses, they started saying, "Oh, do you associate with this sexist, racist guy?" And Manning, who published my books, and pretty much anyone they could go after. And then all of a sudden, people were pretty high in tech and had I considered a lot of them friends, started disavowing me, right? Because people were tweeting to say, "Oh, if you don't disavow John, then you must be sexist and racist as well." So they're crumbling and disavowing me, and then pretty soon what had happening was Pluralsight called me and basically made a unilateral decision to remove all my courses from their platform and to disassociate with me, and then make a public statement about about me not agreeing or being in violation of their code of conduct or their guideline, which I asked them to, which I said, can you point out specifically what thing I did or what one tweet that I said that you found to be sexist or racist, or right, which they couldn't, right? They said, "Oh, it's the character of your tweets, not a specific one." I said, "Well, just give me one specific one," right? Same thing happened with my book publisher Manning, and they decided to pull the book and then make a public announcement of it, which of course made things worse for me because now all these people felt vindicated, and yeah, so that's basically what happened. I mean, it ended up costing me probably a couple $100,000 in damages from the royalties I would have received from the products, but yeah.
So that's really interesting. You went after the Hydra, like instead of trying to defer it, you played the tank role. If this was an RPG, but it was like a mega boss that really came down on you. What are your steps now to, figure out your situation and shore yourself up and I guess start anew? Or
yeah, so like all in all, it's kind of interesting what's happened from it, right? So on Twitter, I actually ended up gaining a lot of followers, which was interesting. I mean, I lost some. It probably netted even, but I ended up gaining some. And what I did was, so with the Pluralsight courses, Pluralsight was removing some of my courses already. So, I mean, there's definitely some big financial damages. Definitely, at least it's going to cost me a couple $100,000, I would say, over the next 5 years from money I would have made from those courses. With the book, the publisher actually, the rights revert back to me. And so I'm going to self-publish the book now, which will actually turn out to be a net benefit because I'll make more money from that, and I'll have a story, which will be good. I've got a mailing list of about 90,000 software developers with my Simple Programmer company, and so it's given me some free publicity. Of course, with that has come a lot of people that have sent me a lot of hate mail and whatnot, but also there's been a huge amount of support, right? Because what's happened and what's interesting about this whole situation is that a majority of people support me and what I did. I made a YouTube video about this, and it was one of my most upvoted YouTube videos that I've ever had. But most of the support is in private, right? So I've gotten a lot of DMs, a lot of messages on Facebook, a lot of emails from people, a lot of anonymous emails saying, I support you, and you're fighting the good fight, and this is ridiculous, but I've got a family, and I've got a job, and I can't support you publicly, which is a shame. So, I mean, ultimately, it doesn't have the effect that they wanted to have, right? I'm not bowing to them. I'm not apologizing. I'm not crushed. They did some damage to me, but I'm going to continue on. It's good having my own companies, and that you can only do so much damage. But I think it's more reputational, right? It's like there's an appearance that they've done more damage than they have. And in reality, most developers do not support this viewpoint. It's just that this is the loudest voice, and this is the voice that you can't oppose, because if you do, there's dire consequences. And really, a lot of the people that were involved in making this whole thing happen, one of them, her hashtag is cause a scene. She basically does this as almost a profession. Like, she stirs up the pot and gets people canceled, and that's what she's proud of doing. And on her actual Twitter account, she has blatantly racist statements against white people. So I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. So yeah, and actually one of the things that happened after this, which is really concerning, is, I mean, I can understand people thinking I'm an asshole and I said some mean things on Twitter. Okay, granted, I don't think you should destroy someone's life, especially when they're defending someone else. But someone could take that point and say, well, it doesn't matter. You said what you said and you're getting what you get for it. I can understand that viewpoint. But a friend of mine, Charles, who basically they came after because they said, hey, you do a podcast with this guy, like this guy's a friend of yours. If you don't disavow him, then you are accepting what he's done. And you
Collateral cancellation.
Exactly. Yeah. So they basically said you have to stop being friends with him. and he made a video and he said, I don't agree with John. John doesn't handle things the way I would handle them. I don't agree with things that John has said, but I'm not going to let someone tell me who I can and cannot be friends with. That's between me and John, right? And then he said in the video also that he would like to, he has a podcast network. He said, well, why don't we get the people involved in this? Why don't we just have an open discussion and just have some civil dialogue around this? And he made the mistake of saying civil dialogue, right? Which is, I guess, tone policing. Which I had never even heard of the term.
Only when it's directed against them.
Right, exactly. So I thought
it's always unilateral.
I thought, literally, when I saw the term tone policing, I was like, are you serious? This is a thing? This is actually like, a thing? So what ended up happening was they came after him and started canceling him, and they got his podcasts, like podcast episodes, canceled that he was supposed to interview do at big companies, at big conferences. They actually got him banned from the Linux Foundation. So there's a conference called Kubicon, and this made some pretty big news. Even some big names in the software development industry. Actually, Uncle Bob Martin wrote a open letter to the Linux Foundation, because he was very concerned about this happening, that he would be canceled simply for not disavowing me, right? And then there was also one thing that they had posted as well when they tried to get him canceled from the Linux Foundation, banned from all their events and banned from this conference, was and he's not a speaker, he's just an attendee. This is this is how crazy it is. They posted a picture of him in a MAGA hat in front of Trump Tower, which he had, which is also pretty concerning, considering that you would ban someone from an open source conference based on that, right? So it's kind of a question, like what, and they won't even say what he did, right? So he's asked, multiple people have asked, what exactly, how did he violate the code of conduct? What exact thing did he do? And the unspoken message is that it's tone policing by asking for a civil dialogue, and but what seems to be inferred is that it's the MAGA hat. So I don't know exactly what it is. Maybe it's a combination of the two things, but yeah, he's been being attacked now, and they're trying to cancel his shows. They're trying to basically cancel him, just as, like I said, like you said, collateral cancel culture.
So, okay, this seems like I've seen this pattern happen over and over again. And it seems to come down to that there's this activist class who inserts itself into a community and then waits for the right time to just cause a cascade of totalitarian rule over,
right.
They accuse you guys of tone policing, but they are thought policing at the same time. There's a lot of hypocrisy there. There's also a majority of people who don't want to go along with this, but can't afford or can't do the calculation to stop it. But if more than a certain number of people stood up and say, no, that's not how we do things, then that activist class wouldn't have the traction that they do. How do you think that we can empower the mild people or the moderate people to see that they have to stand up, or else it's going to come for them? It's going to start, that activist class is going to encroach more and more and more until they say, not only did you defend a guy, but you did not denounce this man.
Right.
Therefore, we're going to cancel you. Do you have any thoughts on that? Or
I mean, it's tough. It's like it's sort of like asking, how do you prevent someone who wants to kill a lot of people from going into Disney World and doing so, right? It's almost like there's, if they're willing to pay whatever price they're willing to pay, there's not a lot that you can do to prevent that, because it's a one-sided risk reward, right? So, and it's even worse in this case. It's almost like, I guess the first analogy is not so good, but let's say that someone walks into a crowded area with a gun, right? It's like, how do you convince people that they need to risk their lives to stop the shooter, right? It's like, you're probably just going to let the shooter do whatever they want to do, right? You're probably not going to, because the risk versus the reward is very, very low, ratio for you. And so I think that's the problem. What I've done is I sent an email to my list. I mean, I made the YouTube video. I sent an email to my list blasting them and telling people, hey, this is what Pluralsight did. Let's make this company feel the pain. And so they sent, a lot of people from my list sent emails to Pluralsight, to their support, saying that they cowered to the mob and canceling their subscriptions. I don't know how effective that is overall, because the other problem, and especially I think the reason why they do this on Twitter, is that with Twitter, I don't have control over who I can reach. Right. So it's a really good platform for social justice warriors in this one-sided unilateral communication and this, pushing an ideology. Because if you have, if I send a tweet out, right, and it is something that, quote, proves I'm racist or sexist, right, then all these people can retweet that and get a huge reach on that. Right. But
yeah, they can frame
Yeah, but I can't respond to that publicly, right? I can't now speak to those same people. I can only respond to that particular tweet and whoever it's reached. But if I make another tweet saying something else, I can't reach that same group of people. So I don't get a chance to actually defend myself or to spread the message, right? So, the best I can say is that, the people that are in positions of influence and power have to be the ones that really vocalize and stand up and don't apologize and don't cower to the mob. But those are the people that have the most to lose, right? So in my situation, right, one example I'd told Pluralsight and some of the other companies that had participated in canceling me is, I said, look, I could have just said my Twitter account got hacked. Right. If this was just a small oversight and something that, I could have just said that, or I could have just said, oh yeah, whatever. I was angry. I was on my medication or off my medication, but I'm owning this. I didn't delete any tweets. I'm owning this because this is not right. And, and that comes at a pretty high cost. Whereas a lot of people that have been caught in the storm, especially in the tech industry, it's hard for me to judge them, because what will happen if you don't apologize? What will happen if you continue to speak out is that they'll come for your job. They'll come for, everything that they can do kind of damage to you. And there's not much, benefit in you speaking out, except for that you're doing the right thing. And I think that's the reason why this works, is because they've got nothing to lose. You've got everything to lose. So why would you fight them aside just on principle? And I'm fighting on principle. I've had enough, but it's hard to get other people to do the same.
Is there is in the Linux culture, there's like this open source ethic.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that there could be an ethic about open mind, like an open mind ethic, or some sort of appended set of behaviors or behavioral norms that could stymie this sort of totalitarian capturing of the institutions of power? Like a gentleman's agreement or gentle them's agreement?
Yeah, it would seem like that'd be the case. I mean, that's what's so ironic about it, about open source. Open source is sort of, you would think, would be the bastion of free thought, because just because of what it is. Yet the open source community seems to have adopted these codes of conduct, which are, codes of conduct are probably the worst things that we've seen in the tech industry, because they can be applied, subjectively, and they're used to actually discriminate against people. So subjectively, right? Or okay. I mean, objectively, they can, someone can just decide, that someone's in violation of the code of conduct. It's very loosely interpreted. So, it's kind of interesting that that's happened, right? And I think part of it is because there's this Trojan horse here of exactly what you're saying, right? So you're suggesting that there should be some agreement that we should have a freedom of thought, and the Trojan horse is sneaking in diversity into that, right? Is because what they say, well, yeah, you're right. We should have freedom of thought. In fact, we should have equal opportunity. We shouldn't discriminate. This should be a meritocracy. And then in comes that Trojan horse of diversity and inclusion. But inside there is actually the opposite of all those things, because it is not actually a meritocracy anymore, right? It becomes the opposite of that. And there's all kinds of vocabulary that's inserted strategically in order to redefine terms and to make it so that you can't argue with it. And I think the big problem is that we're not arguing in logical terms, right? It's, if you are an opponent in a debate and they say, if they throw out the idea of logic, you have nothing to debate. And that's kind of the situation we're in right now, right? I think a lot of people need to read John Stuart Mill's on liberty, and because it's scary, where we've gotten. So,
when did these codes of conduct begin to be implemented in the open source community?
Gosh, I'd say I've been sort of had my head in and out of the software development, because I started a new company called Bulldog Mindset, where I'm teaching personal development for men. It's kind of crazy because it's the exact opposite, right? It's like if they saw that and some people did, it's like it's a totally different audience, right? There's none of this in that audience. So I would say that, I've been kind of out of it for the past 4 or 5 years, but that's when it was really starting, right? I started to see code of conducts showing up. I remember there was this incident with some kind of Pi conference. I don't know if they called it Pi Gate or something. This was, I think, pre the Gamergate thing. And some guy was at a conference and he made a joke about a dongle, right? Which is like a hardware thing. He's like, "Oh, do you want to see my dongle?" or something like that. Or, and some woman was sitting near him at the conference and overheard his joke, and she made a very big deal about it. And I think that was the thing that started the code of conducts, right? Because he ended up losing his job and getting fired for this joke, and I think she actually ended up losing her job and getting fired for making a big deal about it. But I believe that's where this kind of started. I think then conferences started saying, well, we're going to have code of conducts to prevent. And I think it was probably a good idea to start, right? Like they were just trying to prevent the kind of crass behavior and sexual harassment and things like that.
Clean up the toxicity.
Exactly. But then you have someone come in and, again, under that Trojan horse of saying, oh, well, hey, I can even make it more diverse for you. I can help you even more, and start changing the language and the vocabulary. And that seems to be the big tactic is like even just the idea, like we were just talking about tone policing, right? I reject the idea of tone policing. I don't even accept that as vocabulary. I see no problem with it. It's something, it's an invented term, just like, I think tone policing is an extreme example, or it's not as extreme of an example of it. But, if someone cannot speak in a civil way, I think it does invalidate their argument. I think we can't have a discussion. We can't, because you don't know whether intimidation is being used in that case, right? If you can't articulate your arguments in a civil way, then yeah, you really don't have a place in the discussion. But they try to make that accepted so that tone policing is a bad thing, right? Is something that you can't do. And I mean, a good example of this, take the word mansplaining, right? Again, invented word. Right. Yeah. Both of those words, invented words that I would reject that word right out. I would say there's no such thing as mansplaining. Right. But in order for me to say that, what ends up, if someone accuses me of mansplaining, I have to say, no, I'm not mansplaining. That's ridiculous. I'm just trying to, communicate this point. I'm just giving my opinion. But by me saying that, I acknowledge the vocabulary word mansplaining. And so I'm premise there is such a thing as mansplaining, and this ridiculous concept. I can make up a word, say you're doing it, and then if you argue against it, now you've acknowledged my new word that I've created, and that's kind of the tactic.
Same with
strategy,
white fragility.
You have exactly right, yeah, or redefining the word racism, right, to have power in the definition instead of just being discriminating against someone based on the color of their skin. That's racism, right? So all of these things have been created. And this vocabulary has been created, and these terms, vocabulary has been overloaded, and the definitions have been changed so that it's pushing a narrative and an ideology, because whoever controls the words controls the meaning and controls the ideas. And this is something that, and I think part of the reason why we can't fight this very well is because the people that are pushing these things, they have a strategic plan. They're doing this on purpose, right? It's not like everyone is a useful idiot. They're using a lot of useful idiots in order to promote this ideology, but there are key players that know the psychology behind what they're doing, that know exactly what they're doing, and they are getting their useful idiots to spread and push this. And it's such a covert attack that it's almost like, unless you're really embroiled in this battle and seeing this, you don't see the patterns, right? It's like, from looking at this from the different angles and seeing it happen in different places, I can see the patterns. It's not a coincidence that these same vocabularies, the same tactics are being used over and over again, right? Just like, it's like apologetics, right? It's like you say, well, you're being intolerant, and then immediately someone replies, oh, don't you know about the paradox of intolerance? And you look at that, and that's a piece of garbage. That's not an actual logical, but it's the automatic response, right, to all of these messages. Yeah. It's just like apologetics for any kind of bizarre cult or religion. Someone has an answer for every logical statement you make against it, and it's just repeated. It's not original thought.
Okay, so you. At the same time that this was starting to build up steam in the tech community, you were over in another place working on personal development, which can be construed as you're building a morality, or at least a set of principles. So I'm wondering, the question is, how are your set of principles in the Bulldog arena differ from the ones that you see here? And how would you argue as those being a better way to live your life or to construct a social interaction around?
Yeah, 100%. So the biggest difference is the difference between the victim mindset and what I call the Bulldog mindset, which I call the opposite of the victim mindset, right? All of these things, all of the, here's an example I would give you. Let's suppose that I had a son, right? And let's suppose that son was born with one leg. Okay, and he told me, he said, Dad, I can't compete against the other kids in my school in racing. I can't run because I only have one leg. I can't compete with them. They're faster than me. I would sit him aside and I'd say, look, son, I'd say, you're no different. You're no different. That's an excuse. There's no difference between, you can run just as fast as those other kids. Now, in my mind, I know that this is not 100% true. I know he's going to have to work twice, maybe 3 times as hard, right? But the reason why I would tell him that he's no different and that it doesn't make any difference and he's just as good as someone with 2 legs is because telling him that he's disadvantaged does not help him. The proper message that's going to benefit him the most in life is to say, it doesn't matter you're just as good and live your life that way, because he's going to live a more successful life. Yes, I know his life will be harder. Yes, I know it'll be more difficult for him, but that's the mindset. That's the opposite of the victim mindset. Whereas the victim mindset says, hey, look, what's happened to me? How have I been oppressed? How am I disadvantaged? How am I, handicapped in some way? How are other people doing things to me or my environment or circumstances? And how's that affecting me? Whereas, to reject the Bulldog mindset is to take 100% responsibility, or the victim mindset is to take 100% responsibility for your life, and to say, you know what, whatever happens, I'm a big believer in Stoic philosophy, which, basically says, hey, whatever happens as far as fate goes, it doesn't matter, because I can deal with the situation I'm in. I've got the hand I'm dealt, and I'm going to play it the best as I possibly can, and my life, with the goal of improving myself, and knowing that I fought the battle as best as I could in this life. And that's the fundamental difference, right? All these people that are complaining and whining and trying to, force diversity, and trying to show how they've been, mistreated or oppressed, some of that may be true. I'm not disagreeing that there isn't, historically, for sure. Today I think we live in the best time for any kind of marginalized people today in society. So some of it still may be true, but that mindset and focusing on that, and the anger involved with it, because anger doesn't solve anything. Anger is probably one of the worst emotions that you can have. It allows people to take control of you, to have control and to manipulate you. Anger serves no purpose. Anger comes from expectations that are unmet, and it requires you to have expectations, which is a bad way to live your life, in my opinion. But all of that is not helpful to these people, and the people that are promoting it, that are promoting the diversity inclusion under this guise. What they're doing is they're teaching people learned helplessness, the victim mindset, to say that it's not their fault. You're just a victim of circumstance, which is the most destructive ideology that you could possibly impart onto an individual, right? I'd rather, tell someone, like I said, an example of, if I had a son that had one leg, I would tell him he's just the same as everyone else, because that's the mindset that is going to lead to
isn't that a lie, though? I mean, aren't you founding it on a lie? I mean, isn't there an expectation in there that he has to surmount that disparity that he has? And if he can't recognize that, yeah, there is like a 50%, he's 50% less legged than everybody else, that is inherently disadvantaged. Like, I don't understand why you have to build a lie into saying, well, no, that's a deficit that it's your challenge to rise above.
Yeah, I mean, good question. So the reality is that he has one leg. The interpretation is that he's disadvantaged. Now,
okay,
granted, it probably is somewhat of a disadvantage, but again, this is the problem with all of this thinking. Especially, you have these issues of equal pay, and women being paid less, and or there's not as much opportunity, or people of color being paid less, and all these things, and maybe if and white privilege, and all of these things are based on the idea that success is how much money you make. Or success is winning the race. Success isn't that. Success is living to your maximum potential. Success is about fulfillment. It's about what you achieve and accomplish in regards to yourself, not about competing with other people. And that's, this is one of the big problems with this whole thing, is this message. It's the wrong message. It's telling people that success is how they compare to other people, which is completely wrong metric to apply, right? You can't compare the success of someone who was born into a wealthy family and became a billionaire to someone who was born in a poor family in the Philippines and became the best that they could possibly be. Those if you're comparing people based on those metrics, it's ridiculous, and it's going to lead to people being unhappy, and more than being unhappy, being unfulfilled in their lives, and that's the real problem that I have. And so, yeah, I mean, you can interpret as me telling, if I had a son with one leg, telling him that he's just as good, as a lie, but I don't think so. I consider it to be the truth, because
Hmm.
he is just as good. There's no, he is not disadvantaged. Like, no one knows what a disadvantage is. Also, right? There's so many people that have faced adversities. They've become strong because of those adversities. I would never, all the bad things that have happened to me in my life, I wouldn't take them back. I don't feel like they've weakened me. I feel like they've made me stronger. I feel like I'm a better person, and I'm more successful because of
Hmm.
those things. And so now, some people have adversities, and it does harm them, and it does hold them back. But we can't judge as individuals. We can't judge someone else's experience. We can't say, oh, you were born into with a silver spoon in your mouth into a family of millionaires. Good, that's good. You're advantaged. Not necessarily. I do coaching, private coaching, and one of my coaching clients was a trust fund kid. And
Hmm.
man, I would not trade his life. I would, he's living in the shadow. He can't, like, his biggest struggle in life is that he has no purpose. He has nothing that he can achieve, that he can do. He has to really, really dig
Hmm.
to make to feel any kind of self-worth, because he's just been given all this stuff. So
Hmm.
so it comes down to this fundamental conception that I think that the people that are espousing this ideology here of the victim mindset, what they're doing is they're basically, what it really equates to is they're judging themselves and telling other people to judge themselves by their circumstances and in relation to other people. Whereas my message, what I would call the Bulldog mindset, is to say, no, you take 100% responsibility for your life, and your
Hmm.
value has nothing to do with how many medals you've won. It has nothing to do with how much money you make. It has everything to do with what were you given, and how did you maximize your own potential? How did you develop yourself? How did you develop your character? How did you become, did you live up to the potential that you had? And that's the fundamental difference.
You said earlier that anger doesn't help, or it's some sort of block. Have you not been angry during this whole situation? And what have you done to not be angry, or to deal with that, or to use that fruitfully?
It, it's it's funny. I mean, I know in saying this, it's hard to believe, but I haven't been angry. And a lot of it is because I've been practicing Stoic philosophy for a very long time.
Hmm.
I've got a whole life journey behind this, but what I can say about it is that I don't have expectations. I don't have expectations on people. I don't allow people to have expectations on me. This was a fundamental life shift that I made a few years back, and it fundamentally changed the way that I interact with the world and my emotional well-being, right? I very, very rarely have negative emotions. It doesn't mean that I'm happy all the time, but what it means is that I don't really get angry at people. I don't really get jealous. I don't really get very depressed. I don't have a lot of these negative emotions that I used to have all the time, because I literally will let anyone do whatever they're going to do. That's fine. Right now, it doesn't mean it's not the same thing as being complacent. You can still fight a
Yeah.
battle. The example I use: have you seen Avengers Endgame?
Hmm.
Okay, so Thanos is a great example, right? The dude is pretty masculine character, probably the toughest character in the whole series, right? And he's designed to be that. He does not get angry. He's not. He's able to fight a war. He's able to battle, and he's like destroying half of the universe, right? Not that what he's doing is necessarily. I'm not siding with Thanos. I'm not agreeing with wiping out half of the universe, but at the same time, he
Huh.
believes what he's doing is right, and he's fighting that battle, and
Yeah.
everyone else is angry at him, but he's not angry. So he's able to execute. And in fact, I would say that he's the reason why he's so successful in what he's doing is because he's not angry, because he's able to act without emotion and to not let that cloud his judgment, right?
Yeah, but without that emotion, he doesn't necessarily have sympathy to everything that he's destroying. I mean, there's a sociopathy that's built into this if you don't have negative emotion, or if you don't have the ability to empathize or sympathize with other people.
So the way I look at it is that there's three ways to deal with emotion. One of them is to suppress. The second one is to express, and the third one is to experience. And what I focus on, at least teaching men to do, is to experience. not to suppress, not to express, right? If you suppress emotion, you become this passive aggressive person who has this rage inside you, and you're in danger of doing something like shooting up a school, right? Like you haven't dealt with the anger, right? You're trying to pretend like it doesn't exist, but it exists. If you're expressing, right, you're the person who walks around with your heart on your sleeve, right? You're the typical nice guy, right? When I'm coaching guys, I'm telling them the reason why they're having trouble with women a lot of times is because they're wearing their heart on their sleeve. They're too emotional. They're letting emotion you're the person who can't control their anger, who gets angry at every little thing and shows it, expresses it. But the person who experiences is in between. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Why? This is a side note, so maybe I should let you finish. But the question is, why do women not find that nice guy valuable? Do you have any insight into that? But let's get to what it is to experience emotion.
Okay, yeah, I'll come back to that. So experience is to allow the emotion to recognize it, but to observe it as a third-party observer, as it's happening to you, and then to let it go, right? And I strongly feel that emotions that you don't experience, they get trapped inside you, and they cause all kinds of issues for you later on, right? And I know this from personal experience of dealing with fear, right? I was afraid to fly airplanes and to go on roller coasters, all kinds. I had a lot of fear, and it was the problem was I wasn't experiencing it. And once I allowed myself to experience the fear, then I actually overcame the fear, and I was able to become a lot more of myself, of the person that I truly am, versus the person that was controlled by that fear. So I guess what I'm saying about all this in dealing with emotion is that it's not about being numb and not having emotion. It's about, at least as a man, the masculine is about controlling that emotion, about managing that emotion, about having emotional mastery to experience life in all its colors, right? But to not hold on to it, to not allow it to influence your actions. Because, when you think about maybe even a character like Thanos, I think there's a scene where he sacrifices his daughter, right? Obviously, he's feeling some emotion there, right? He does have a degree of empathy there for sure, but he's taking the action anyway because he's not allowing that emotion to determine the ultimate outcome of the action. He's analytically and logically based. He's like, if I need to get to this goal, I'm going to have to make this sacrifice, and he's made that sacrifice. And did it probably hurt him as a character? I would say, of course it did, but he's made that choice. And so it's the same thing, with anger. Do I ever experience anger? Yeah, of course, but it's such a small moment of anger. A good example I would give you is I used to get really angry. I used to get a lot of road rage about that, right? And then what I started to realize as I started to kind of come into the Stoic philosophy was that I have no control over this. This is kind of silly. Like, to be angry at something that, like, I have this expectation that the traffic should flow smoothly, but the world does not revolve around my expectations. And so what I started to do was I'd get stuck in traffic and I'd get angry, and then I'd kind of look at myself and from a third party and say, John, you're angry. This is silly. You're such an idiot. Why are you angry about the situation you can't control? Who are you angry at even, right? And then I would laugh, right? And what would happen is I would be able to let go of that anger because I've experienced it. I've acknowledged it. I'm not suppressing it, not hiding it, right? And then I let go of it. And now what happens is when I sort of program myself. So now when I get into traffic, I don't even get angry at all because I don't even have the expectation anymore, right? And so, I think there's kind of two issues. One of them is like dealing with emotions that you have, and then another one is getting rid of the negative emotions because you don't even have the pattern that creates that response anymore, right? And that's where a lot of where I'm coming from is I've eliminated a lot of that pattern. I don't have a lot of expectations. I've sort of decided that I'm going to live my life however I live my life, and whatever happens, whatever consequences come from that, I'm willing to accept them. And so when stuff like this happens, I'm going to fight, but I don't necessarily get angry.
But how do you know? How are you ensured that you're not going to end up being a sociopath? I mean, you brought up Thanos is a good test case for being a Stoic leader, but at the same time, he's highlighting the very nature of Thanos in that story is to be the ultimate bad guy. So what feedback loops do you have that you're not heading down the path of like ultimate evil or just semi-evil or becoming somebody who doesn't really care about other people, like a CEO of a fossil fuel company is just trying to maximize profit. Humanity be damned.
It's always I don't really like the term sociopath. I feel like we're all capable of being sociopaths. I feel like it's not an accurate term because again, it's a label that in my mind doesn't make sense because it all comes down to prioritization of values, right? And most people, the reason why they don't act on their quote evil impulses has to do with the consequences of their actions. It's not actual virtue, right? If you in fact there was a movie I don't remember if I don't think I watched the movie, but I remember hearing this movie and the premise of the movie was that for one day or so many hours there would be no laws, right? I can't remember what it was called, but it was something like
the
Jubilee
Purge,
or
I think. Yeah.
The Purge. Yes. That's it. Okay, so I didn't actually watch the movie, but I'm familiar with the premise of the movie, and it's kind of interesting, right? I mean, if there's no laws, if there's no consequences for your actions, what will you do? So really, it's kind of funny. The people that you would maybe call a sociopath, those are the only people that you can really trust to some degree, because they're acting they're acting purely from the outcome that they're trying to achieve, and it's clear. Whereas everyone else is pretty much acting in their own best interest, but it's not clear. The motives are not clear.
That. Okay.
Exactly, right? I think that's just a problem of human nature, is that we're always, even Dale Carnegie, right? How to Win Friends and Influence People. What did he say in that book? He said that the only reason why you ever do anything is because you want to. And he said, I can put a gun to your head and I can make you want to do something, but you're still only doing it because you want to. He even said when you give to charity, the reason why you're giving to charity is not because you're good, it's because you like the feeling you get when you give to charity. So even Dale Carnegie, I mean, the How to Win Friends and Influence People, he acknowledged this same basic, you could call it flaw in humanity, but that's why I don't like the idea of, like, to me, someone who would be classified as a sociopath is someone who is aware of this and is able to manage this within themselves and is seeing the reality for what it is. Again, there's probably different degrees of it, and there's probably people that are psychopath and bent on destruction. But
so it seems that leaves up stopping somebody from following the destruction of the human race, up to not the individual who's doing that, but to everybody around them to stop them. If somebody comes to a logical conclusion and is just following that path, then it's everybody else's responsibility to stop that outcome from happening. It's not that person's responsibility to say, maybe I don't want this when I do want this. I mean, what do we do about evil people? Even if they're admirable? Or how do you stop from becoming an evil person? Because if everything is just being honest with yourself and controlling your emotion, what if that has a bad result?
It's kind of funny. I just did a YouTube video on this because someone asked me, based on a lot of my philosophies, well, how do you deal with the problem of good and evil, right? This is a huge philosophical problem that philosophers have had throughout the ages. And my way, I believe that those are just labels that you apply, right? So the problem of good and evil, even beyond good and evil, right? There's a good book on the subject, but they're sort of arbitrary, right? Like, is there really such a thing as evil? Now granted, there are things that you do not want to happen, and again, and philosophers throughout history have tried to define, what makes something moral, right? And they've tried different approaches. Utilitarianism is probably the one that we see most often, but there's a lot of flaws in utilitarianism, right? I mean, you end up having to sacrifice innocent people in order to be the greater good. And then when you deal with the issue of what is for the greater good, it's, how do you quantify that? And there's a lot of problems with that. So what ultimately, no philosopher has ever come up with the definition of what makes something morally right. Right. What it turns out to usually be is just what we feel is morally right or wrong, which I think there's some value to that, but ultimately there's no clear definition of what is good or bad. Ultimately, what ends up being good or bad is what is deemed by society as right or acceptable. I mean, if you went back to the Mayans, right, where they were sacrificing, thousands of people and literally ripping out their hearts while they're alive, that was a good to that society at that time, right? I mean,
okay, but you still feel the impulse to resist the social justice warriors from taking over your industry. So
right.
Where's your moral foundation? What do you have to stand on to say that this isn't right? How you're acting is not right.
Right. So I can't really use a moral argument, because if I do, then I'd be hypocritical. But I can use a logical argument, which says that for society and for people in general, the best course of action that we could possibly take is to have a society that's based around an open dialogue, where ideas of differing values and differing viewpoints are expressed openly without recourse. Because that makes the most sense. Because that, I could go to looking at the arguments that John Stuart Mill's put forth in Non-Liberty. He made some pretty good arguments in regards to the idea that what society deems good at a particular time in history can change, and so we don't know what the absolute good or bad is, right? At his time, whatever the Catholic Church said, that was great. 90% of people agreed with that. Only 10% people, were the heretics that disagreed with that, where it's pretty much the opposite now. And then he also made the argument to say that, how do you know if your idea is good if you haven't tested it against a bad idea, right? You have to have the other party speaking, not just to validate your own idea, but you could be wrong, and you can't know that you're right unless you've tested it against someone else's logic that has the opposite viewpoint. So that would be my main, the main way that I would say this.
On a
that's true.
sociological level. So
right.
on an individual level, you don't want to adopt the victim mentality because it makes you a miserable person, and that's it's not I don't know if that's a moral argument or not. So if you follow down this path, you're going to be miserable, and you're going to be ceding more and more your own personal power. If you follow the Bulldog mindset, you might be just as miserable, but at least you won't be stuck in recursive misery loops.
Yeah. I would say that you get to decide whether or not you're miserable, right? To interpret your situations as as you see fit when you have that mindset. So
maintaining agency is the ultimate good then for you? Maintaining agency over your emotion, over your action. Okay.
So my highest value in life is freedom. And my definition of freedom is your ability to exert your will upon the world, or more specifically upon your life, is which you could argue it equates to the same thing. But the more that I'm able to exert my will upon my own life, the less that I'm in the backseat of a car that someone else is driving and that I'm driving that car, right? So if you have the least amount of ability to exert your will on your life, you're basically in the car that is your life. You're strapped in the back seat, duct taped, and you're going whichever direction someone else is driving, fate, other people, right? And again, this is a valid argument against anger, because anger means that someone else can make you do or feel something or act in a certain way. It's almost always the case, right? When we're angry, we're not thinking logically. It's that's proven scientific fact, right? A different part of our brain activates the primitive part of our brain, the lizard brain. So so definitely we do not have as much sovereignty over our lives when we're angry. So, but in general, the more sovereignty we have over our lives, the better. That, to me, that's the highest value. Right. And it's not just other people that are oppressing us. It's mostly us. Right. Because you say in your brain, your will says, I'd like to go to the gym tomorrow. I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m. And you set your alarm clock. And at 5 a.m., you hit the snooze button and you don't go to the gym. Your freedom is inhibited by your lack of discipline. So your lack of developing your character is actually making it so you have less freedom and you have less sovereignty in your life. And so again, that's another big component or principle of the Bulldog mindset, is the idea that I'm trying to teach people how to have discipline, because like Jocko Willing says, discipline equals freedom. And it truly does, because the more discipline you have, the more that you're able to exert your own will upon your own life without any outside interference. Sure, there's outside interference, and most people blame their circumstances on that. But really, the biggest thing that's holding us back is ourselves. It's not other people. It's not being oppressed. It's none of those things.
What happens when you need to bind your will with other people's wills, like in a larger project other than just making yourself better, or in organizations or in communities? Like how do you conceive of a framework to adjust your will to the wills around you in order for a certain outcome to happen?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of sociological experiments with this exact thing, right? If you're familiar with tit for tat as a strategy for the prisoner's dilemma, right? Mm-hmm. So this is exactly, that's how I'd answer your question, is to say that there's a lot of game theory involved in this, right? It's the reason why we do things is because sometimes we have to compromise because it actually gives us the best outcome. So we calculate those things, and we shouldn't do things that we don't feel like have a good outcome for us. We're not just going to bend our will for no purpose. It's more like the prisoner's dilemma. It's this tit for tat. It's recognizing the pattern, and that's why we cooperate when things are. The ultimate end of cooperation is that we feel like we will ultimately benefit by participating in the cooperation rather than not.
Ultimately benefit. So when you went to defend Amy, that was not a selfless act. And insofar as that action had a tremendously negative consequence in your financial, your immediate, probably some mental stress, but you're over that part. And you already said that you wouldn't undo that. You would still do that. Were you playing a bigger game by defending this person, or by drawing the wrath of the crowd on you? Were you trying to protect a larger sphere of, agency, or a larger playing field, and sacrificed yourself?
So there are a few things here. So I would say that my actions were not wise. So I would do things differently, for sure. What I did was I gave the people that I was fighting against enough rope to hang me with, right? Because of some of the things that I said and the way that I said them, I could have argued and made them angry and had them come after me by using civil discourse. Just by opposing their ideas, I could have had the mob turn on me. But I used vulgar language. I attacked people personally. Those were not wise moves, because even though it had the intended effect of diverting the mob to me, it allowed them also to have something that they could tout around and say, look, this guy's sexist and racist, because, hey, tweets are just, 160 characters, and you can take a screenshot and it doesn't define a person, but it doesn't matter, right? That's as long as you've got the some semblance of evidence. Now, I didn't go so far as to say anything specifically racist or sexist. I'm not racist or sexist, right? It's kind of weird that when you're on an interview, you have to declare that as if, but you do today. And I'll say that. So from that regard, I'm not going to say everything I did was noble and I made all the right decisions. I would definitely do things differently. But why did I do what I was doing? I think there's a couple of reasons. One of them is because I consider Amy to be a friend and a good person, and I don't want to see a good person suffer, and I don't feel like she should lose her job and suffer these negative consequences for speaking her mind. So I jumped in for that reason. But perhaps the bigger reason is because, honestly, at that point I said, you know what? I can't sit by and let this happen. I'm sick of social justice warriors attacking people, of getting away with this, and no one ever saying anything, no one ever standing up to them, no one ever, telling them that they're wrong. and this does greatly limit the agency of people, right? If people can't speak out and say what they want, maybe I can show an example of this. So again, did that actually matter? Probably not. Like, looking back on it, did I actually make much of a difference? I don't know. I mean, to some regard, right? I've been able to reach a lot. Like, what actually turned out to be the best thing that happened, which was also bad, was that my friend Chuck, who basically got involved in the witch hunt just because he wouldn't name me as a witch, was burned at the stake. That ended up actually showing so much hypocrisy, because people could look at me and they could say, well, John's an asshole. He called these guys pussies. He said this. He told a woman to shut her mouth. Okay, he deserved what he got. So he got canceled, whatever. He should suffer mega financial damage and should have death threats. And that they can, someone could plausibly say that. I would disagree and say that's not a adequate punishment, quote, punishment for saying some mean things on Twitter. But hey, someone could make that argument. But as far as what happened to Chuck, no one can make that argument. Like, it's so ridiculous. It's such a hypocrisy. It's so crazy that I hope that has brought awareness, and I know that it's brought some awareness. So that negative thing that happened to him is actually probably going to be a positive end. Will it be enough to actually tip the scale at all in the direction that we'd like it to go? I don't know, but
there's a slight crack in the moral argument that you're putting forth, and you probably already have the putty to put in there, or maybe I'm just imagining this, but it seems like what you did for Amy was selfless, or like you were expressing care for this other person that didn't necessarily have a direct positive feedback for you. Maybe you only did it because you felt good, but it seemed like there was a principle that was larger than just self-interest at play there. So I'm still concerned with your philosophy, because I can see a sociopath or somebody who doesn't care about people to take that and not have to worry about caring about other people. I think that the value of caring for other people is it's axiomatic for me, but I don't know if it is for you.
No, I agree with you 100%. A lot of the reason why I did it was because I did care that this person was being attacked and hurt and destroyed, so it's kind of interesting because everything that I'm doing. So just to give you some background, right? So I'm financially independent, right? I've made a lot of money doing courses online. I've invested all my money into real estate. I have passive income. I quote retired about 5 years ago, right? When I say retired, I mean, you don't have to work anymore. I went and lived on the beach for 2 months and got sick of it and got bored because I wasn't really living a purpose in life anymore. And so, so the reason why I'm saying this is because the whole argument for what I'm doing, the reason why I'm even here, the reason why I'm teaching men and personal development and teaching the Bulldog mindset has everything to do with me wanting to help people, has everything to do with me having compassion on people and wanting them to see them succeed and to have good lives and to make the world a better place, right? So it might seem kind of counterintuitive to my philosophy, but ultimately, there are things that are going to drive us that aren't going to make logical sense, right? From a logical perspective, right? I think, and I would also say, again, to maybe I'm getting a little bit out there in the woo-woo land, but I believe that there is a divine nature to the universe. I believe that there is at least a consciousness that we're all a part of, and I believe that the largest manifestation of that consciousness that we see is love. I believe that's the only way you can explain love, and I believe that is a very high principle that we should have and that we should be seeking to make the world a better place, that we should be seeking towards the direction of love. Again, if I were hard pressed to define evil, I would say it's a lack of love. That's how I would define it. Even though it's very subjective, right? But yeah, that's how I would define it. And I think there is that element. And I can't explain that element with a rational philosophical, just like it comes to the same end as me trying to explain, where did the universe come from? Well, if I go back to Big Bang and say, well, okay, well, yeah, but where did that damn particle come from, the initial one? And it's like, well, I don't know. I can't explain. Did God create it? Is there a God? Like, if so, God created it, then who created God? And like, there's no way to come back to any kind of logical argument from even the beginning of our universe. So I can't really come to one as to why love is important, but it is.
And because it seems to me that social justice is founded on the same principle. They want fairness. They want justice because they care, because they are concerned about the lack of love in the world, and they can reduce that down to a sociological algorithm and an intersectional, stack of variables of historical oppression and all that stuff. So I think you already said it, but what is if it's the same prompt to make the world better, where does it diverge? Where does the Bulldog mindset and the social justice mindset diverge? And if you could, do you think there's a way to take that social justice mindset and just make it a little less woke and more awake in the direction of what you think is a better way of achieving a loving world?
Sure. Yeah. So what I would say is that the big difference here is, maybe it could equate down to this one simple thing. Do the ends justify the means? And I would say no. The means are just as important as the ends, if not more so. And I say this, if you've ever achieved a goal in life, right? I've been running marathons. I trained for a marathon and, run a marathon. And you get that medal, and you've run that marathon. Is it really about getting the medal? Is it really about that? No, it's about not about the goal. It's not about accomplishing running 26 miles. It's about the training. It's about who you become in the process of achieving that goal. And that's what's more important than the goal, right? If we become animals in order to create equality, we've lost humanity. It's not, I would rather live in a completely unequal world where things are completely unfair. And to be real, the world will always be unfair. One of the greatest principles we can teach young children when they're growing up is that the world is unfair, and that's just how it is. But if we could live in a perfectly fair world, yet it would require us to be cruel to one another in order to enforce that equality, which we've seen throughout history, right? I think a lot of people misunderstand some of the bad things that have happened in history. You take even someone like Hitler. Do you think he was really thinking, oh, I'm evil, I'm going to do evil shit? No, he thought he was doing what was good. He thought he was going to create a perfect race, a perfect society, a utopia. He was trying to achieve a utopia. Now, I completely disagree with his philosophy and his methods, but he was self-consistent within his own ideologies. And he was willing to say, he said, you know what? This ends that I have of having this great, whatever, the means justify them. And that was a mistake. Same thing with Stalin, same thing with Pol Pot and many of these regimes, although maybe Pol Pot, I would question his morals a little bit more. Yeah, exactly. Right. I think that was more of a selfish grab, but a lot of times in history, this has happened. And so, I mean, that's what I would say is the fundamental difference, is that the means don't justify the ends. The means are the thing that's important, because my life and my value is about who you become, not what you do. And again, this comes back to the whole definition of success. I would consider myself to be successful in life if I've become the kind of person that I consider to be to have maximized their potential, to be of value, not by accomplishing things, not by having things. Right. And again, that's where it comes in. And then if you're to take social justice warrior, that mindset, because I do believe that a lot of people are trying to do good. They believe that it's good. Not all. So some people are just angry and they're just bitter, and they've been filled with bitterness because other people have told them about how this injustice is. And again, I would say that justice and love are not necessarily the same thing. But I would say that there's a really good example. There's a guy, what's his name? Daryl, I can't think of his name, but he's a black guy, musician, he went and he started talking to the KKK. He actually started going to their meetings, and he became friends with like the leader of the KKK, and it was a genuine, authentic relationship. Eventually, like he ended up having like, because of him, I think 60 to 80 people directly left the KKK, and like 200 people left as a result. And his whole thing was to just to have an open, genuine dialogue, to understand their viewpoints, to not judge them, and to have that discussion. And when you start, again, if social justice warriors actually want to achieve diversity and inclusion and change people's minds and change people's hearts, then the way to do it is by showing people that we're all human, which happens through discourse. When I talk to you, right, when you see my tweet, you might say, oh, this guy's a racist, sexist. But I guarantee you, if we sit down at a coffee shop and we have a discussion, and I talk about my dreams in life and my goals and my family, and you talk about yours, we're going to see that we're both humans, and that these labels don't apply. And that's the answer. It's not to attack people. It's not to shame people. It's not to judge people. And one of the biggest problems that, again, you could see this happening today in tech, right? So this whole thing happens. This whole thing blows up with social justice warriors and whatnot. And, unfortunately, a lot of the people that are causing the ruckus happen to be Black women, right? Because those are the ones that are emboldened. I'm not saying that this is right or wrong. I'm just saying that this is what is happening. These are the most vocal, outspoken people, or a transgender person, right? So these are kind of the people that are the most outspoken, that are raising the ruckus, right? So as a result of all this happening, let's say that you're a white man in tech, right? And you want to hire a developer, and you've got equally qualified developers, but one of them is a white male who has some MAGA hat profile picture or whatever. One of them is a Black female or transgender person. What do you think about now? Do you think you might start to think in your head, again, not that this is right, but this is the consequence of these things. You might think in your head, gosh, if I hire this, person of color, if I hire this transgender person, is it going to be trouble for me? Like, are they going to make trouble? Are they going to like try and cancel culture people in my office? Are they going to start thought policing people? You see what I'm saying? It's like it creates the exact problem that they're trying to alleviate, right? Yeah. They're making people be closet racist and sexist and reinforcing those beliefs. It's so much better if we have someone, if someone says, you know what, I don't really like Black people, and they say it on Twitter, and then people say, you know what, that's kind of weird thing to say. Why is that? Why don't you really like Black people? And then we have a dialogue, and they say, when I was a kid, I lived in this neighborhood, and it was slums, and my dad got beat up all the time, and I got beat up going to school, and it was all Black neighborhood. Then you understand this person. You're not shaming them. They have these. It's not like it's the other alternative. Again, and I'm not saying that this person's right in having this prejudice or racism, but they can't control that. It's not like you just wake up and say, oh, I want to be racist today. It's something that is ingrained in you, right? And so shaming a person for that is not constructive, because if you took the alternative, if someone says, if they say on Twitter, no, I don't really like Black people, and then you say, oh, you're a horrible person. You're a horrible person. You don't deserve to have a voice. You're not human. Let's cancel you. You shouldn't work for anyone. You should live on the streets. And you try and enact that. Do you think that makes that person less racist or more racist? It doesn't change they just learn to not say anything, but they think it, and they think it more. It's so much better for us to have an open dialogue. So if social justice warriors really want to accomplish what they like to accomplish, what has to happen is it has to be open dialogue. We have to start treating people as humans. We can't shame and guilt people just because, even if they have horrible thoughts, the people that have the most horrible thoughts, those are the people that we need to hear from the most, because we need to understand them. And by understanding them, that's how, if you want to be understood, seek to understand, right? I think that's Dale Carnegie. I'm not sure, but that's the key. If you start understanding a person like that, just like Daryl had done with the KKK, it doesn't always mean that you're going to change someone's mind, but it's the best chance that you have, right? And again, the the
Well,
higher principle here is that it's the means. The means. It's the right way to go about something.
Yeah, that might require that you be humble, and that might not be something you want to do. Like actually be humble to understand, rather than just be right. I mean, it's it's stronger to be right, isn't it?
I don't know. I would say that it's not stronger to be right, because it's like this. Who do you respect more? Someone who, maybe you've got a coworker or something that you get into discussion with, and it doesn't matter what the topic is or that they're not ever going to change their mind. You're just arguing at a wall. Or someone who is a logical, analytical person, and you're like, you know what? This person is worthy of having a discussion with, because they might not agree with me, but if I can logically convince them, then they have the potential. They might not do it, but they have the potential to say, you know what, John? You're actually right. I think I'm wrong here. You made some pretty good points. Yeah, you've changed my mind. That's the person you respect. That's the person you consider to be strong. Not the other person. Not the person who just clamps down on their thoughts.
Mm-hmm. So what's the next step for you then? Like surveying the damage that's been done, and I guess figuring out how to produce products in a different way, or what's the next project, or how are you going forward?
I mean, I'm just going on as business as usual. I've got a blog post coming out this week describing, like telling what's happened, and calling people to message Pluralsight and let them know that they don't like the fact that they, cowed down to the mob. That will help, and I think it will hopefully inspire some people to fight back and not accept these things. I'll continue on my Bulldog Mindset channel to use this as an example of why the victim mindset is so destructive and why it's so important for you to be strong. Not just from the perspective of like, oh, they're doing bad things, also from my own story, as I can suffer this damage and not be butthurt about it. I'm okay. I'll be fine. I'm just going to move on. It's something that's happened. Right. And I think that's a powerful, because I think one of the things that really scares me about this whole situation is, what if this wasn't me? What if this was someone else? Right. Like, I can take it. Even the financial damage, I can take it. It's not a big deal. I mean, it is a big deal, but I can treat it as if it's not a big deal. But suppose that you're just some senior developer on Twitter, and you got drunk one night and you did what I did. Okay, or maybe you're not drunk, but let's just say that let's say that you got drunk, because let's absolve a little bit of the responsibility to make it this person is more not deserving of this, right? And so you say some bad things on Twitter, okay, and then the next day someone comes after your job, right, and you get fired from your job. You get you had like a side project. It gets taken off the web. Right. You now have this reputation where no one will hire you in the tech industry because you've got this black mark. You're a racist, sexist asshole. So you can't get a job. You've got a family that you're trying to support. What happens? Do you like go and say, well, damn, I lost everything. I guess I'm going to go jump off a bridge. Or do you maybe get a gun and start shooting up other people because of your frustration, right? Like, this is the thing that scares me the most about this is, I'm glad that it happened to me, because I can handle this and I'm not going to do anything crazy about it. And it's not the end of my life. I'm just going to move on. But I think about the people that they do this to, where you've taken everything from someone, and they don't have the stoic mindset. They don't have the capacity to handle this situation. You're driving people to the edge, and this is just, just horrible. So anyway, long story short, I'm just going to move on. I'm going to keep on selling my products. Like I said, I think one thing that is redeeming about this whole situation is that most of the tech community doesn't even participate in social media. 90% of developers aren't even on Twitter, right? They're just working regular jobs, and they're on my email list. They're buying my products. My sales have not gone down at all. So I'll continue to sell those products. I'll self-publish my book. I already have one book that's self-published that I make more money from the one that was through the publisher anyway. So it'll be their loss on that. And and I'll just move on. So
Well, the same thing with, in a certain respect, with Evergreen. The amount of negative press that was brought down on the social justice mindset by their acting out, and it was kind of a watershed moment. Maybe I'm overstating it because I'm so close to the situation, but it was a watershed moment to show that things are going in the wrong direction or had already gone too far within that one domain, and so the normies get to like be prepared. There
Yeah.
could be a lot of catastrophizing about that, but you're in a position because you're speaking to a different audience to actually say, okay, this is the stuff that's happening. You're probably going to see it start to act in this way. Here are some tools to stymie it or to prepare yourself for that.
Yeah, and honestly, the big thing, I don't know what tools there are to fight this. I could give you tools to prepare yourself for it by saying you need to build up your inner strength and to become a stoic and to not let shit affect you because it's just life, it's just an adventure, and just shit happens. I can give you that, but how do I give you a tool to fight this? Aside from saying, the really sad argument, which really, the only way I can see to fight this is that it's the same way that wars are waged, where you have to have 1,000 people charging the line, right? It's like, how do you take over the trench? A lot of people are going to die, right? They're going to have to sacrifice themselves in order to do it. So is this a great enough cause where we have to like be unified and say, okay, well, we're all going to fight, and some of us are going to die, some of us are going to get canceled, but we're all going to come out against this. And really, the only reason why that's worked historically is because of the draft. Right. And we wouldn't have, like, World War II would be a little bit different without a draft. Right. I mean, you think about it, right? Like, you had to force people, you had to compel people to sacrifice themselves when they don't get any real benefit from it. You can say, oh yeah, you're a hero, you're a soldier, you've saved the free world. But in reality, individual basis, sacrificing your life to be one of hundreds of thousands of people that were mowed down by machine gun is not a value proposition that you would willingly take, right? So it's the same thing here as I see it. I mean, I'm open to suggestions. You have a tool that we can use to fight this besides me saying, hey, everyone, you're just gonna have to trust me here. Some of you are gonna get your careers destroyed, but we're all gonna go fight against this and come out against this and speak against this, because it's not a very compelling argument to say that let's go run down the machine gun.
Well, my ultimate game theory that I've come up with, just considering it on my own, is that if we establish media and relationships that are much more rich and fulfilling than the alternative, maybe they're in control, maybe they can write all the op-eds and cancel people, but there's a paucity of actual human behavior there, and naturally people are just going to want to avoid that kind of miserable existence and put their faith more and more in deeper human contact. So that's kind of like my media, push, or like the bet that I'm making is that in the longer term, this kind of dialogue is going to be much more fruitful, much more worthwhile and valuable than the alternative.
I hope so. I just don't see a way of bringing about that change.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of the efforts that I'm taking, unfortunately, have a side effect of creating what the left would call an alt-right, right? Because what ends up happening is, in fact, I don't know if you're familiar with the term MGTOW, men going their own way.
Yeah.
So it's a direct response to the feminist movement, and it's a horrible movement. It's just as bad as the feminist movement, if not worse, because what it is it's guys that are, again, and I would equate this with the social justice warrior group, feminist social justice warrior, kind of all this is all this same kind of ideology, like a neo-Marxist ideology. The problem is that these guys have a lot of good grievances against it, just like I have grievances against social justice warriors and this kind of ideology. But my response to it is to take a balanced approach and to say, let's move forward, let's show each other kindness, let's have open and civil dialogue. Some people whose emotional maturity is not of that level, their response is to go all the way over to the other side and say, we hate those people. Those are the enemy. We hate them. And they then do the exact same thing, and they claim the victim mindset on the other side. They say, oh, I can't live my life, I can't get married, I can't have a happy life because of women. Women are horrible, right? And that's what they do. And it's the same thing, akin to that on social justice warriors is the far alt-right, where we have a lot of really actually racist people who are now really preaching white supremacy and doing this secretly and forming their own kind of glue to hold each other together. And that's very dangerous. So I don't know. I mean, it's really hard. Like there's very little centrist, like enough rational people that we end up having, again, that term useful idiots, I think is a great term because we have it on both sides. And I don't know. I don't see this resolving in a good way. I see it resolving in a very bad way, as I know, again, I'm very involved in the men's community, and I'm trying to pull these guys over from MGTOW. I'm like, look, no, you're doing the wrong thing. This is not the response to feminism that you should have. You should be your ideal rational person and deal with things, not have the victim mindset. So I'm trying to pull people away from that. But gosh, all of this on the left is pushing people towards it. And there's very few.
And then they're attacking you.
Oh yeah, believe me, the stuff that the social justice warriors have said and called me, that is nothing compared to, if you look at my YouTube channel, the comments I get from the MGTOW guys that hate my guts. Those guys would literally tear me to pieces if they got a chance. That is some vile stuff right there. So it's and I was, it's funny because I was telling one woman on Twitter, I was like, I don't mean to use the word ally in the overloaded term that you guys use it, but I'm your greatest ally, and you don't even know it. Like, you think I'm the sexist enemy asshole, but the guys that I'm holding at bay, those are the guys that really hate you, that would really actually do physical violence to you, that are that have a horrible ideology that is sickening, and I'm actually that's
working to de-radicalize them
than you think. So. Yeah.
Well, that's
it's a bad situation.
That's a skeptical. It's a cynical lay of the land there. Well, I'm not cynical. Not
and
cynical,
I'm an optimist,
word,
right? I consider myself to be an optimist. I just don't see, like, I've been racking my brain about this since this happened. I'm like, what can I do? What is the actual effective thing? The only thing I can do is use my platform to speak out against it, right? I think we've got, this is why, I was interested in what you did with Evergreen. I feel like I can send people those videos and say, look, this isn't what you think it is. This is what it really is. And when people see that, a lot of people say, oh, wow, I didn't realize what was actually going on. This is the same verbiage I've heard that I thought was just, people calling you an asshole. There's an agenda here. So that I can see, we have people like Jordan Peterson and some of the good speakers that talk against this, that are able to influence people. But unfortunately, like I said, even that, right? And you said it multiple times in your videos, like, you're like, okay, I'm just presenting the facts here. I don't want you to hate these people or take action against these people just because of this. And you even said it as well. You said, even though I hate to even make this disclaimer, I remember you saying, because even by me making it, it emboldens people more, right? Or something to that effect. And it's true. It's like one of the problems of speaking out against this is that people get enraged and they go far the other way. And now we have just as big of a problem on the other side. And so it's really hard. Like, how do you get people to be rational and moderate and to have, like, you cannot beat wisdom into someone. Right. And this is essentially the task that must happen. Right. On either side, we can't go to social justice warriors and suddenly make them wise by using rational arguments against them, because it just makes them even more emboldened. And again, the general people that we talk to, a lot of times we're trying to do something good and tell them about this, but then we're radicalizing them to what would be called the alt-right.
Damn. Oh, damn. I wanted to wrap up on a good note, but I guess there's a lot of work to do. That's a good thing, right?
Well, I'll give you something to wrap up on a good note. I'll say this. The best thing I think that we can do, honestly, is stop so much as individuals focusing on everything that's going on. To some degree, that might mean that things are going to get worse. But if we start focusing more on developing ourselves, developing our own character, building ourselves, becoming stronger, focusing on what we can control in our lives, which is, it's only what comes into our brain, how we interpret the things. If we can become better people, then to some degree, maybe there's a hope that if enough people become self-actualized, that it changes the whole world, that there's some breaking point where we have a tipping point where this happens. But even if it doesn't, just as an individual, if you become stronger, if you develop yourself and your character, then all this shit that's going on doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter, because the weapon that people use to hurt you is to have you care, right? And when you care, when you're hurt by these things that people do that you can't control, then you're giving up your sovereignty, and that makes your life bad. But if you don't care, if you decide that you're going to focus on yourself and developing yourself and helping the people that you can impact that are around you, and being the kind of person that believes that the means are just as important as the ends, then you will live a better life, and you will make other people's lives better. And and if enough people do it, then I think there is a tipping point.
Good. Thank you for that ray of sunshine.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot, John. I will link all of your things. If you can send me those, I'll link them all in the description. And
Okay. Yeah.
It's a good conversation. I liked how it went from the problem into the philosophy, and then going back to the problem with your philosophy and examining it in that light.
Yeah, good. You had some great questions. I mean, this is I like to actually be challenged and to have to actually think about this, because it helps me to understand what is it that I actually believe.